teachers. It also says, and the life of Shinran, but I think we'll save that for next time. That's a bit of a travel log because Reverend Shelley and I have gone on a couple pilgrimages to places in the life of Shinran, and so we took snapshots and we've put them together. So that will be next time. This time, we'll go back in time. If you could, there's a Shoshinge chanting book in the seat back pocket of your chair or the chair in front of you, whichever. And I don't have one, so I will rely on you. I will rely on you. Learn to delegate. That's one of they say in priest school. So a little ways in, this person Ryuju is mentioned. So it's Ryuju Daishi. It's hard to start chanting in the middle. You'll notice that the back is the front and the front is the back because it's bound in a traditional Japanese way. Reverend Shelley's not looking it up. Oh, she's done, so okay. I may break down and get. Did you find it? Anyone? Anyone? Ryuju? I think it's probably page 9, but I could be way off. Dum 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 da 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 da. 13. 13. Do I have corroboration? I see many nods for 13. Is that the first? What is it? Ryuju Daiji. So Daiji or Daishi means wonderful teacher. And these wonderful teachers we have on their pictures on the wall of the teachers, where it belongs. And so Ryuju there is the first one. Now, we go through this complicated problem with Buddhism. It's lived in many different countries, and so in each country, people kind of mangulate the name of the person to fit their linguistic, nature. So Nagarjuna becomes Ryuju. I don't know how to say Nagarjuna's name in Chinese, but in there are probably 3 other languages in between Sanskrit and English and Japanese before we got here, so the names get moved around a lot. So what I do is will teach on the basis of the name that's in the Shoshinge. That way, later, when you chant the Shoshinge, you'll say, oh, here's Ryuju. Hi. It'll be an old friend that way. If we use some scholarly people want to use the Sanskrit name for this and the other, and it's just so confusing. So we will kind of stick to this name, Ryuju. Ryuju was a wonderful teacher, and really, remember back I had a slide about how the different kinds of Buddhism, maybe the Buddha taught all kinds of different ideas to different people, and then those threads kind of came forward in history. Some of them died out. That theory is different from the theory that the Buddha taught one thing, and then it kept getting messed up and messed up and messed up. So it started out as one thing and became many things. The Buddha taught for 40 years, and he taught very different people, and he as a teacher grew and changed over time. So I find that he probably taught lots of different things, point of view more reasonable. And if you look at anybody, if you looked at Einstein, for instance, if you compare his early writings to the last things he wrote, they're completely different because he saw the world differently. Now, why would we think the Buddha didn't grow as a teacher over that time? I think it's reasonable to say he did. So, that said, Ryuju is credited with being an important champion of the Mahayana teachings. And there's a fanciful or a mythic story of Ryuju going to talk to the Naga king. Naga is like a snake. And the Nagas, there's sort of a Naga world. We're going to use that for every one of our, so you can keep the Shoshinge in your hot little hands if you care to. so Ryuji went and talked to the Naga king, and he gave him the Mahayana Sutras. Okay, so Nagas in India are sort of the ground-dwelling beings, a lot like us, but we don't see them because we're not underground. And we're a little bit, as humans, we're a little afraid of them, so they're kind of at arm's length. Sometimes they live in lakes, but sometimes just underground. In the ancient Indian religions, the rivers were the gods, and they were like snakes. Well, rivers, snakes, there's some connection there. And rivers are life-giving. They're very valuable and important. And, the rivers in India are revered. Is that an accident? Rivers and revered. To the point where we even have a vial of Ganges water on an altar there that somebody gave us, and it seemed important. So Ryuji went to the Naga king and got these Mahayana Sutras. And he was 200, so that would have been 700 years after Shakyamuni Buddha taught in northern India. So in that in-between time, where were these sutras? Well, where do the Nagas live? Underground. Where do teachings that are not, if you were a Christian in China in 1950, where did you take your underground? So maybe that's for me, that's like a much more reasonable historical explanation of what's going on here than Ryuji went to the magic king and he materialized these sutras for him. It makes sense that underground meant underground. So Ryuji was credited with receiving the Mahayana Sutras from the Naga king. That's why there's a Naga protecting Ryuji in the statue there. So it looks like a cobra, but he's actually sitting in the curled part of the cobra, and then the hood is protecting him. So often that representation occurs, even with Shakyamuni Buddha, because the earth and the Nagas are closely connected because they're from the earth. They come out of holes in the ground. So that pretty much, in some ways, it means just Mother Earth is protecting. But in Ryuji's case, he received these underground scriptures, sutras, from. And he wrote a lot about bodhisattvas, which in the previous popular part of Buddhism was not a big, important idea. And he wrote a big, complicated treatise about how to become a bodhisattva. And then, one of the 10 chapters is this method that we use. Trying to find the quote. If anyone contemplates Amida Buddha, recites his name, takes refuge in him, they will instantly enter the stage of assurance and subsequently attain the highest perfect bodhi. So Nagarjuna is kind of saying that there are all these complicated practices, and you can follow those complicated practices, or there is this other way, and this is the way that we follow of gratitude, of like harmonizing with the wise, compassionate energy in the universe, but not I'm going to make myself enlightened. That's Jiriki, self-power method, and Ryuji was, and through most of these teachers, you could do it this way, or you could do it this way. You could reach toward enlightenment. You could follow the path either way. Now, for Americans, doing it yourself is the way we do everything, right? Every pioneer who went out, up a canyon and cut down all the trees and planted corn did that by themselves. Well, not really. But anyway, it's a nice story. The fact is, the axe they cut the trees down with was made by somebody in Pennsylvania, right? And forged there and then shipped on a train out to Deadwood, and then it was in a store, and then somebody bought it in Deadwood, and then that went to their farm, and then that went to their farm, and then finally the pioneering person got it. So that all the causes and conditions that flow into the myth of rugged individualism are a little bit suspect. I mean, we have our contribution, sure, and it was a lot of effort to chop down all those trees to make the field of corn. But it's good to remember that we're part of everything. And so we like stories or methods that seem to be all about the individual doing everything. Even the Olympics, the heroic quality of Olympians is that they did this thing. But the number of people that go together to make it possible for one person to ski jump for 150 meters or whatever, 120 meters. They don't try to go as far as possible because that would be dangerous. But anyway, it's interesting because it's almost a middle way practice. They try to just far enough to be better than everyone else, but not unsafe. And so Ryuju pointed this out, but he literally 9 chapters about the arduous study you can get there kind of method, self-power method, and then he mentions that this other method is another, or you could do it this way. But it's important to us because Shinran pointed out Ryuju as the first teacher that talked about this method of Nembutsu. So this Namu Amida Butsu we call Nembutsu. Nen means remembering or bringing to mind. Butsu, it's pretty easy. We could guess that means Buddha. I guess to me it's obvious. But that's Buddha in Japanese, Butsu. So Nenbutsu, bringing to mind the Buddha. Niem Fo, I think, is in Chinese. That's the method that Nagarjuna brought up. There is a way you can just do that, or you can do all these arduous practices. And he was pretty much saying, after 9 chapters for one chapter for the other, he was pretty much saying the self-power method is the thing. But it's nice of him to include the other possibility. So the next teacher is Seishin. What page is Seishin on there in our Shoshinge? It could be spelled slightly differently, but try to go phonetically. It will be after Ryuju and before the next one. Maybe 18? Do I have? You can cheat and look for Vasbandhu in the English. I'm just going to go find a Shoshinge myself. I thought it was like on 2 pages later, so this would be a painless process, but it's good to engage the students in some process while you're teaching, right? Didn't they teach us that in teacher school? I think they did. Page number? 16. Okay. Yeah, it's confusing. So there's a lot of weird alliterations that happen sometimes in Japanese. So Tenjin and Seishin are the same person. I think that's what's going on here. So anyway, the next teacher in our story of the teachers, and he taught a lot of things, but Shinran found in commentarial literature that Seishin wrote about Amida Buddha and how praising Amida Buddha, I know we're stepping into worship, and that's always a complicated word, but having the aspiration for birth in the Western Pure Land, just wanting to not be in this difficult state and to be in a place where you could hear and understand the Dharma clearly, that aspiration is essential to birth. So in Pure Land talk, often we'll say birth, and we don't mean getting born again as a mom to a mother. We mean rebirth in the Pure Land, but we just say birth because it's shorter. Maybe ambiguous, but it should be obvious after a while. He talked about aspiration for birth, transferring merit. So in Buddhism, because there's non-self, if you do something good, or if someone does something good, the goodness of that can actually be directed to other beings. That sort of makes sense because, like if you were all intermingled, like a hand works, like we think of them as individuals, right? The fingers, and yet they work together and they rely on each other. So imagine that your index finger could do something good and it would benefit, I hate to call it pinky. It sounds like I'm a first grade teacher or something. The small finger. I don't know what what's the grown-up word for. I mean, there's a doctor word for it, but that's not the fourth phalange. No. The point is that if we're all actually interconnected, then intention and will is also part of the matrix of all being, then we could do something good and actually dedicate it and send it to or for someone. This happens a lot in all parts of Buddhism. Merit transference, it's called. And usually the regular folks will try to do something good and increase their merit stores so that maybe their rebirth would turn out to be better next time. That's kind of a self-power way of looking at it. Amida Buddha did the opposite. Amida Buddha generated a vast quantity of this positive energy we call merit, and dedicated to all the beings that were really unable to do this for themselves, which is interesting. So the actual, and that makes sense, in this whole matrix of being, that direction of positive energy could go both ways. So, Vasbandhu Seishin, Tenjin, is saying that if we take refuge in Amida Buddha, we're kind of opening a conduit, a connection to Amida Buddha, and that positive energy can benefit us. It does sound kind of, I mean, we're selfish beings, so they're going to, the non-selfish beings are going to relate to us in ways that resonate for selfish beings. So that makes sense. Take refuge in the Tathagata, whose unhindered light aspire to be born in the land of peace and bliss. Just that intention to get beyond this is essential. Sometimes we call that bodhicitta, enlightenment mind. Doesn't mean you're enlightened, but it does mean that you're thinking in that direction. Okay, Donron. Donron. And there's a little description in the Shoshinga, there's a little description of each one of these gentle folk. Donron. Page 19. I got it. Oh, I forgot. Cast and members or employees of the television station are not allowed to participate in the contest, right? That used to be a thing on game shows where they would say that anybody remotely related with the show wasn't allowed to win a prize. Okay, that's the only one I'm going to do. On 19, Donran. Honji Donran Ryo Tenshi Joko Ransho Bosarai. So Donran's really interesting because that's the first one of the great teachers that's in China. So Buddhism flowed down the Silk Road. It kind of was in northern India, and then it went kind of what we call Pakistan, Afghanistan, and then from there it flowed down the Silk Road to China. About this time, now this is a little bit before, soon it will be essential that Buddhism be in China because Buddhism in India and Pakistan is wiped out at the point of a sword. So, but at this point, it's kind of the first introduction of Buddhism to China. And really wonderful, interesting thing happens. Donran is a Taoist priest, a Taoist scholar, and then these Buddhist priests come down the Silk Road and they say, oh, I'm a Buddhist priest. And, oh, well, I'm a Taoist priest. So what do you guys think? And they have conversations. And the initial relationship is, that's the same, cool. That is completely wrong, but that's the initial experience. Taoism is an eternalist philosophy. In Taoism, you have an eternal soul. It goes to after you die, they always cremate the body, and they do that so that you can go to the spirit world. And the relationship between the spirit world and the human world is permeable. Things can go back and forth. You can send gifts to your dead relatives in the spirit world. It's kind of neat. If they're in hell, you can send money to buy them, to bribe the hell guards to let them out of hell. Sounds a little bit like the Mormon thing. They have that. You can rescue people after the fact from a hellish state. Anyway, so that's very different from Buddhism. But somehow in their first interactions, and so they would use the Taoist word for trying to think of something. Don't really have a good example. Amida means infinite light. So maybe they use the Taoist word for the, on the yin-yang, the white part of the yin-yang, the light part, and they say, oh yeah, that's the same thing. And this is actually the way that we usually, when two cultures run into each other, they try to find similarities. Often the similarities are awkward or forced, but you want to find a similarity. And then over time, usually after a generation, people start to iron that stuff out. So, but Donran, this picture is Donran, and he's burning, it says in the Shoshinge, he burned his Taoist texts. Now that always sounds like, whoa, this is pretty radical. He became a Buddhist priest and burned the books. Who burns books? Nazis? Not nice people. But in Taoism, when you burn something, you're releasing it off to the spirit world. It's the respectful thing to do. Even for us, if the Shoshinges get old or whatever, we burn them. But in a organized, respectful way on the temple ground, as opposed to putting them in a landfill, that would be terrible for the book. I'm not really getting into the environmental issues of paper in it. So Donran, when it says that, he said it really means he's giving up his Taoist ideas and he's moving on to being a Buddhist teacher. And the wonderful, amazing thing about that, and probably because he was an established Taoist teacher, when he became an established Buddhist teacher, then it was easier for him to reach folks. But he noticed the duality or the two paths in Buddhism, the self-power path. Sometimes we call that the path of the sages, but the self-power path and other power path. Pure Land Buddhism is an other power system. He was good, and maybe because this all was new to him, he and this is true often with teachers, if they learn something afresh themselves, then they become quite good at teaching other people. Whereas somebody maybe who grew up with something doesn't really know all the nuances and all the questions that come to mind when you first experience it. So sometimes in religious things, convert teachers are actually more effective than people who grew up in a tradition, because they more recently have experienced all those questions. The idea of absolute reliance on other power, Donran brings up a lot in his writings. And, that sounds kind of weak to Americans, relying on someone else. We're going to just give up having an army and let the Canadians protect us? That doesn't seem like a real good plan. But that's not what we mean. We mean that if we're all completely interconnected through this energetic matrix of everything, we talked about merit transference going across some interconnections, so those interconnections are real. So whether or not we walk through the door of a spiritual place that will benefit us, we think we decide to do that, but really, there are an awful lot of causes and conditions there. And all those other causes and conditions, if self-power is I, me, my, pretending I decide everything, then there must be something else. There must be. And so we'll call it other power for want of another word. We do try to avoid saying him and putting a big gray beard on him. No offense. And a staff and a throne. No. There's other power. There's other interconnections that are contributing to our growth, to the positive things, wise, compassionate things happening in our life. And Donran pointed that out in a real systematic way. He did it in a way that, and China was quite literate compared to some cultures Buddhism has flowed through. So a lot of people heard about it, and there was, I think there were like callers. There was a process where people would communicate. I mean, they'd have newspapers, but it was sort of a way of sharing these new ideas that had come from India in the last few hundred years with everybody. And then monasteries started popping up, temples started popping up. The idea of this part of Buddhism, valuing Amida Buddha, Nimbutsu, bringing to mind the Buddha as a Buddhist path, has always been more resonant with regular folk. Not to say that there aren't wonderful scholars and mystics who go off on their own and do that. They do. But for regular folks, it makes sense. Amida Buddha generated this path on purpose to be accessible to people who weren't really good at spiritual stuff. So regular folks would be, but Donran is credited with the first real mass movement in China. So then there's Dao Cho. Oh wow, that's on the same page almost. The great teacher Dao Cho. Oh, looks like he knew Donran. Seems like the same person, doesn't it? Okay, well the point of that is that they're all in here and we chant them and we remember them. It's this, a lot of, most Buddhist schools have some lineage chants. The Zen folks do it every morning because you got to kind of remember where did this come from, who are our teachers, part of it. Doshaku is credited with kind of harmonizing Ryuju's thoughts about the easy path versus the difficult path, and not Dao Cho, yeah, okay, the guy before, help me out, Donran. Donran's talking about other power and self-power, and Ryuju and Doshaku kind of figures out a way that, well, yeah, easy path has to do with other power, the difficult path has to do with self-power, and he weaves those things together as a teacher, so that's what we credit him with. He concluded that no one in the last Dharma age of Mappo can attain enlightenment by means of the path of the sages. So we talked about this in the first class, that we have in Buddhism, there's a sense that close to a teaching Buddha, spiritual growth is really, really easy. And then as you get more and more distant from the Buddha's time, it gets more complicated. And you can get to a Dharma age that is quite corrupt. And, somebody can say they're teaching you the Dharma, but in fact, they're just vacuuming all the money out of your bank account. And we're not doing that, but this may occur in such an unfortunate Dharma age. But in that unfortunate Dharma age, harmonizing with Amida Buddha, with this wise compassion energy, the process we use, Nembutsu, still works. Because it isn't actually dependent on the localized phenomenon of a teaching Buddha. It's actually dependent on the localized, or the phenomenon of Amida Buddha teaching in the Sukhavati, his Buddha field, which is the one that's 3 million leagues to the west, but also right here. In the sutra it says that, so we have to remember that, okay, it's far away, but it's also right here. We're reading the sutra that the Buddha talks about that in book group, so that keeps coming to mind, which is kind of why we do all this, is to find many different opportunities to grapple with an idea and then experience it. So Doshaku wove those two things together. So Mappo, it's very common to think that the time you're in is probably pretty much of a train wreck, and then look back and say, oh, well, things were so much better then. We used to have a thing, Gene Roddenberry's, famous movie producer or whatever, TV producer, he had this idea that we would imagine the future as wonderful. We no longer do that. All of our future movies are horrible. And it used to be that there were movies about how in the old days it was terrible, and now it's okay. But we seem to be, so that may actually be an indicator of Mappo. When everybody looks back a lot, you're more Mappo-ish, and when you're looking forward, then you're in the, if you're looking forward to a Buddha, you'd be in more of the right Dharma age. Okay, Doshaku. Zendo Dokumyo Bushoi. I can find that. Can anyone else find it? 24. That's right. So Zendo is really important. he had this wonderful explanation of kind of where we're at, where we need to get to, and what's going on. And he explained it with a parable about a thin white path. And the thin white path is kind of like a bridge, but it doesn't say bridge, it says path, is across a river. And the river is a river of fire and a river of water. Or maybe the white path is between a river of fire and river of water, the way the artist has drawn it here. Sometimes the river of fire and the river of water are the same thing, if that makes any sense. I think I heard in New Jersey, was it? A gasoline truck crashed and it poured flaming gasoline down the sewer mains, and then that went down the creek just this week. They put it out. The Coast Guard put booms around it and collected the gasoline, so it's okay now. But you can't have a river of fire and river of water at the same time, I'm just saying. So, if this side of the river, we use the word other shore a lot in Buddhism, so this shore means regular life, samsara, the difficult world we live in. The other shore is enlightenment, or Amida Buddha's Pure Land where enlightenment is easy, which often are almost equated because the potentiality and the reality of it are, once you get there, then you can get enlightened. So it's practically enlightenment. So on this shore, we're beset with beasts and brigands like mean pirates, only not in the water. And they have swords and spears and stuff like that. And then there's tigers and bears and all kinds of mean animals. And the poor person, don't have a pointy thing. I'll regret this because it's covered with soot, but okay. This is us, the pilgrim, let's say, and we're confronted or in the difficult state of where do we go? We can run away from the beasts and the brigands and they'll just get us. And the beasts represent the blind passions inside us, and the brigands are our own kind of calculating nature. How do we get out of that? Because we're kind of trapped, and it's scary. Now, there are a few, on this shore, I would note, a few Buddhist priests that seem to be kind of pointing to the path, but they're not really that helpful. It's not like they're saving the guy from the brigands or the beast. They're standing off to the side saying, well, it's over there. That's my job. And then Amida, Shakyamuni Buddha is over there, over the water, same thing, kind of teaching, saying this path exists. And Amida Buddha is on the other shore, beckoning. So some of these hand gestures have to do with that. And I won't get into the mudras, but anyway, but it's trepidatious to go on a thin white path, a foot wide, with flames licking at your heels and waves splashing up. It's scary. And Amida Buddha is over here in the text, it says this, is saying, no, it's okay. Come ahead. It's okay. And what Buddhist teachers there are on this shore are trying to indicate that there's a path and you can follow it. And you have to have, so what does it take to do that? What does it really take to walk on that path? It takes faith. It takes confidence. It's just that kind of optimistic energy that maybe, well, it also takes the judgment that is better than just hanging out with the brigands and, just being a pirate. Let's just steal other people's stuff. Why worry about, trying hard or growing spiritually or something like that? It's a parable. So that's the wonderful parable of a thin white path. And on the middle, the equinox holiday, sometimes we'll put a white piece of paper down the middle of the temple all the way. So if you see that, that's what's happening. Okay. So, Genshin. So those were two teachers from China. Now we're all the way to Zendo, and then are they out of order? If there's any a big mistake on the website, please tell me. Okay, so I'll switch them. So Donran was before. Yeah, what happened? So Genshin is the first teacher in Japan. Shinran was weaving this lineage of teachers together when he was studying in Japan. So teachers have been in India, then they were in China, and now they're in Japan. Genshin wrote this wonderful book, whatever, the collection on the essentials for attaining birth. And again, we're talking about birth in the Pure Land, but we just say birth. So it was very popular. They actually printed them. They were wood block prints. No offense to Mr. Gutenberg, but there's people all over the world making books long before you did. But okay, they didn't use independent type, so they don't count. But they reprinted them, and on some level they were just popular because he spent most of his time describing how bad the hells were. And then, if you followed the Nembutsu, you could be reborn in the Pure Land. So it was kind of had sort of a carrot and a stick element to it, but there's a lot more. I have perused it, and there's a lot more about the hells than anything. So I don't know if people are funny, maybe they just sort of have a negative bias and they're interested in things like that. In Thailand, there is an actual amusement park, and more like a park than a Disneyland, just like a park, with these statues in, like, remember I said there were 300 different Buddhist hells? Well, they have like one for all 300 hells, like a life-size diorama of every hell. So the hell of eating rice, but it's hot coals on your tongue for eternity, or not eternity, but a long time. So that they somehow made a statue of that, and the guy with rice and hot coals. It's a little bit like Genshin's book. But again, it was very popular, and a lot of people heard about it, and a lot of people kind of started to get tuned in to this Pure Land idea. At this time in Japan, there were no Pure Land temples. There were temples that were just had all kinds of different, you would say, syncretic Buddhist temples. So they have every different thread of Buddhism is present in these temples. Hindu temples are a little bit like that because there'll be niches for all the different gods. In India, they usually have their own temple, but in America, that's not really practical. So what they do is they give everybody gets a niche. So that's what the Buddhist temples in Japan were like before. And sometimes it would be a temple complex, and then there would be separate buildings for each different Buddha or each different path or method. So, but Genshin was important. And Genshin taught on Mount Hiei. I'll just go back. Genshin taught on Mount Hiei, where Shinran eventually was studying when he studied all this stuff. And Mount Hiei Monastery is where Shinran kind of realized he was a complete failure at doing the self-power path, and he didn't know what to do. And it's wonderful that he failed, because that propelled him to find another teacher, Genku, and really everything that Shinran taught is just what Genku taught. Genku was in here too. Did I not? I didn't stop for Genshin. Genshin Kokai Ichidai Kyo. What page is that on? 26. Okay. Yeah. And then Genku. And that's on 28. Genku's on 28. Yeah, right. So Genku, I hate to do this, often is referred to as Honen. He has another name, Honen. And like, it's in all of Buddhism, it's really hard for historians, because like if my name's Matthew and then I become ordained, then my name becomes Shaku Shunin, and people just call me Shunin. So now, technically, like they would, in medieval times in Japan, they would no longer call me Matthew, they would call me Shunin. And then if I got a big responsibility and I got like a promotion sort of thing, another ordination, like to run a temple or something like that, then I would get a new name. And then, if I died, they would give me a death name, sort of like my name in the Pure Land name. So then, if you're a historian, try to go back and figure out what this person did. They had 3 different names, sometimes 4, depends on the circumstances. Multiple ordinations, the names can change going along. So Honen, and Genku are the same person. But in the Shoshinge, he's referred to as Genku, and that is, I think, his official title, his ordination name that Shinran would have used to talk about him. So Shinran gives up studying on Mount Hiei, and we'll find out about this in the Life of Shinran thing. But he seeks out Genku, who also had been on Mount Hiei and been part of the establishment and spun out of it and started his own little tiny temple. Not really even a temple, it's just a series of shacks on the side of a mountain outside of town in Kyoto. And if you wanted to hear what Genku was teaching, you could go over there. And when you went over there, you'd find all kinds of different people. Wealthy people, merchant people, or noble people and merchant people, and priests that weren't really involved with their Buddhist temples anymore, all kind of got together, and that's where Shinran found himself. Not a hippie commune, but it was a pretty radical, edgy kind of a thing for the time. Genku got in trouble with the emperor, with the other schools of Buddhism for teaching what he was teaching, and then they wrote this thing on why he was a bad person, and he wrote back and said, well, no, I'm not doing that, wrong thing, and he sent that to the imperial court. Apparently the imperial court had a lot to do with adjudicating disagreements between temples. And eventually, with a little string pulling, Genku was exiled from the capital, Kyoto, to the west. And it precipitated because two of his students were teaching the Nembutsu and chanting to two women who were in the imperial court. And when we say teaching the Nembutsu, we're not really sure what was happening, but they would go to their private chambers, and there would be some chanting sounds, but I don't know. So, I mean, there are always two sides of things, right? They were arrested, immediately executed, those two. And then all the rest of Genku's teacher students, important students, were exiled in different directions, spread all over the place, which at the time, the people in the capital thought this would be the best way to diffuse this movement. But imagine that the movement of Pure Land Buddhism in Japan was a virus, and you had a group of people that had the virus, and you sent one of them in each of the 8 directions. What would happen? You have just spread the virus over your whole country and the whole countryside. So even though Pure Land Buddhism was banned in Kyoto because of this whole thing, people are far away. It takes 2 weeks to walk from outside of Tokyo to Kyoto, and which is to say, you were so distant. Somebody shows up and starts teaching. Okay, well that's interesting. You know, Shinran was Shinran, Gotoku, was exiled to a place north of the Japan Alps, so on the other side of the Alps. In Japan at the time, it was basically impossible to get there in the winter. You'd have to wait till summertime to get from Kyoto to where Shinran was exiled to. But he met people there. He started teaching. People were interested. It became kind of a popular movement thing. Then he moved further east, outside of Hitachi, which is kind of where Fukushima is now. You've heard of that. And he taught all around there, Scuba Mountain. He would wander around teaching, and he would just go from each village. He would just go and teach, and he'd say, in a month I'll be back here. We'll meet at the ginkgo tree, and I'll teach basically all the ideas that we teach about Shin Buddhism. That's what Shinran was teaching. And same thing, he had students that were rich folks and poor people and fancy people, and he didn't merchant people in between. He didn't care. He was just trying to give them the idea that the Nembutsu, harmonizing with this wise compassion energy of Amida Buddha, was valuable and useful and could be spiritually transformative in your life, whoever you were. This really annoyed the important folks who ran the big, huge temples, because the big, huge temples, the way they got money is they were given imperial grants to land, and then there were sharecroppers who essentially farmed the land and gave most of the grain to the temple. So the temples were super rich and the farmers were super poor, often starving almost. But that's not an old story. I mean, it's an old story, but it's happened everywhere over and over again. Anyway, so those are the 7 teachers in our lineage. Customarily, we have a human comfort break at this point. You could pause for a couple minutes, and there's tea and cookies on the tea station there if you're interested or need a blood sugar increase. Oh, there's snakes here too. With Kuan Yin. I feel like they're dragons, but the Nagas, the relationship between Nagas.
just like, you know.
It's been a perpetual event throughout human history. I mean, I'm a child of the late 60s and 70s.
Oh, you know all about that.
The same thing also, and then you two kind of young. But Cobain and certainly
And when you eat
New
orange,
Orleans in 19th century Europe, kind of a human condition to want to, when you're young, to question and try to change the status quo and buck against the military industrial complex. Bet you haven't heard that in years.
It's like a nice ring to it, you know?
Well, we coined it in the 60s.
Oh, there you go.
But it is, unfortunately, it still exists. But yeah, as individuals, you're right, we have to continually question. And I think you're right, Buddhism definitely embodies all those precepts about it. So I thought it was just interesting, the T-shirt.
Oh yeah, that is kind of a funny coincidence.
His music is, yeah. My children were teenagers when he came on the scene, grunge came on the scene in Seattle. I saw it all firsthand.
Oh, really?
And appreciated it. Absolutely.
So returning, we have, so the next section is, we'll talk about Shin Buddhist principles, or the important ideas, these ideas that keep coming up that we talk about over time. Now, each of the 7 teachers that I was just talking about had something to say about these principles, some more or less, depending on who they were. So that's why I kind of woven these 2 things together. They also do appear inside the Shoshinge. So sometimes people say, well, why do you chant this all the time? It's just a bunch of sounds. Well, yeah, okay. But it also has little threads of, Shinjin or Jinen or Tariki, Hongan. All those things are in here. And once you chanted them for a while, and once you learn what those words mean, then when you chant past them, you experience them on some level. And more over time, the more comfortable you are with the Shoshinge. So we credit Renyo, who's the second founder of Shin Buddhism, who's the Shinmon's picture, with reproducing the Shoshinge. Shoshinge was a poem in the middle of a really big book that Shinmon wrote in his 80s. You want to kind of get all his ideas down on paper before he died. So, and then in the middle he wrote this poem, which is this poem. And so almost nobody had ever seen it until Renyo said, well, maybe if we chant this every time we come together at the temple, that would be useful. And sure enough, it was a smart way to go. Okay, so important ideas, principles in Shin Buddhism. Now, think cosmically. There's another cosmic thing. A long time ago, far, far away is one way I think of Amida Buddha. So if there was a real sentient being, person-y person, that was Amida Buddha, it was very, very ancient, like pre-Big Bang or whatever. So that's why that's why I put these slides in there. Mostly I think of Amida Buddha as all the wisdom and compassion in the universe. But that makes these kinds of pictures appropriate too. To have Amida means infinite. So it's not a small thing, it's not something for our tribe in this part of wherever we are on some little planet. It's a big, big energy. Amida means infinite. Amida Buddha is a combination of Amitabha and Amitayas in Sanskrit, the infinite light and infinite life. So infinite wisdom and infinite compassion. So that's quite goes into. So now how do we talk about Shin Buddhism? These important words are ideas. Shinjin, true and trusting, trusting heart. Monpo is deep hearing. Deep hearing of the light is usually how we would say it. That's weird because we usually don't hear light, but one of the priests, Bill, had an important Buddhist talk he needed to do in Japan because they were giving him a promotion from his priest rank, so he's getting a bump up from where I am. And I had to do this public talk in Japan, and he had a Catholic nun friend of his read it, and she kept correcting every time he said deep hearing of the light, because that doesn't make any sense. You can't hear light. But that's why we say it, and I think we have that phrased so that it is it sounds a little contradictory or a little juxtaposed in an interesting way. But Monpo is deep hearing of the light. So the light is the wisdom, the compassionate, the wonderful qualities of everything around us, and deep hearing is how we connect with it. Jinen is naturalness. I'll just go through these just to go over them. Hongan, or the Hongan, is a great vow. So when Amida Buddha was Dharmakara, the Bodhisattva, and made the vow, king, the Bodhisattva, by making the vow to generate this Buddha field that would be accessible to sentient beings in the 10 directions, who just harmonize with his name, with the energy, do this Nembutsu process. That great vow is the Hongan. Sometimes we say primal vow in English, we say great vow, the vow, like capital T, capital V sometimes. The Nembutsu, we talk about a lot, but is bringing the Buddha to mind, Nembutsu. But also it's funny, so we'll call the Nembutsu, which are the 2 scrolls there, we'll call it the name. So if Amida Buddha's name is Amida Buddha, then why are we calling Namu Amida Butsu the name? Again, I'm just explaining it to you. I don't know why that it just turned out that way over the years. That's the word for this phrase. It's the name. But obviously, it's taking refuge. See, it says, "My refuge is the Buddha of infinite light." That's one. I think I have a T-shirt on right now. I had a T-shirt that says, I take refuge in the wisdom and compassion of the universe. That's another little bit more broad way of saying it. It's more understandable to average folks you might see when you're wearing a T-shirt. So I have that on a T-shirt. So that's Nembutsu. And then Tariki is other power. The opposite of that is Jiriki, self-power. We touched on that a little bit with the teachers. But now we'll go to each one of these in a teensy bit more depth. Shinjin, true and trusting, can be described as faith, but it can get a little dicey depending on what you think faith means from whatever experience you have before. That can be problematic, or it can be consonant with it. To say that Shinjin is confidence in the vow is important. If we don't think any of this happened and it's all just made up, then it is relatively pointless. But living life in a pointless world is very dangerous, and we should try not to do that. There is meaning interwoven in everything around us. It's kind of hard to see it. Saying the Nembutsu is with a true and trusting heart, with Shinjin, is kind of the key, like the lock and key, that opens the possibility of drilling further. If we never really harmonize with that idea of Amida Buddha, with the idea of a wise and passionate universe that cares for us and wants us to grow spiritually, then we're going to make kind of random Brownian progress in the world. We'll just go like that. If we can have that kind of focus and have a true and trusting heart, then that key works. A quote from Shinran says, "To thoroughly entrust myself to Amida Buddha's compassionate working without any calculation or doubt." So the big problem is calculation and doubt. Because as soon as I say, all you have to do is say the Nembutsu with a true and trusting heart, then in your mind some China, in some German circles, there was a sense that if we said Namu Nabutsu, Namu Nabutsu, Namu Nabutsu, that would be better than saying Namu Nabutsu. You see what I did there? 3 times is probably better than once, right? The most famous priest in China, famous for saying Nembutsu, he could say it 60,000 times a day. I don't know how you do that. I mean, I've never done the math of how many per second that is, but it's a big number. Some people are better with math than me. It seems like a lot. And it seems like a little bit of misplaced skill, you know? Maybe reading a sutra for the same length of time you were saying this thing over and over again would be better. But Shinran's point of view was, even if you said the Nembutsu once, with a really true and trusting heart, where that doubt was not present, when there wasn't a sense of calculation like, well, it'll be better for me if I do this, so I'll do it, even though I think it's, none of that present. Just none of Nembutsu comes out of yourself, your mind. Sometimes we say it in our head, sometimes we say it out loud. We don't ever differentiate much between the two. How we get to that true and trusting sense is kind of a puzzle. It's really easy to doubt. We're constantly calculating. That's our nature, as the scorpion said to the turtle. You know that story? Scorpions on one side of the river, wants to get to the other side of the river. Turtles, aquatic animals, right? The scorpion asks the turtle, could you ferry me across? Because you can swim, I can't swim, I drown. And the turtle says, well, I don't know, you might sting me. And the scorpion says, no. You're helping me, I won't hurt you at all. So they swimming along halfway across, and the scorpion stings the turtle. And as the turtle was starting to drown, starting to sink, the venom is heading down, and he noticed the scorpion swings back. He says to the scorpion, why did you do that? And he said, it's my nature. I think the scorpion is us in that story. We have a strangely destructive nature as human beings. And it's quite dangerous, and we should respect that, take care, try not to feed the wolf of that nature, but also recognize that it's kind of the way we are. Pursuing spiritual growth is a way to get past that. We can only grow so much in a lifetime. So, remember we told this story of how did we start to trust the water would flow us? How do we learn that life will work out and it'll be okay, and we're not to be terrified every time we lose a job or we have a little car accident or all the different things, we lose a dear one. How do we not have terrible fear when those things occur? It's the same process. Over time, or maybe with a flash of insight, we can start to realize that it's going to be okay however it turns out, and that our conception of the way it should be is actually the problem, and that's why it's hurting, not because of the circumstances of life. So, that was Shinjin. We talked about the 2 aspects of Shinjin, which is recognizing our limitations, and then accepting that there is the wise, compassionate energy in the universe around us. When we put those 2 things together, that's Shinjin. If we have only one of them, if we just auger into the idea of our limitations, we just get depressed and self-destructive. If we only think, oh, the universe is fine, everything's great, let's just take care of it, no problem, I deserve it, I can even kind of fold into that, then you get a different problem. But it's unstable and doesn't lead to spiritual transformation. Combining those 2 fits with Buddhism. It's kind of realistic about things. It's kind of the middle way. It shows both sides. That's why we had such wonderful affinity with the Taoists, because they seem to think that there's a difficult side and a good side to a lot of things. So they were the middle way, and then the Taoist concept of harmony were the point where those two cultural threads were pretty compatible, but there were details that were missing in the old days. So, another Shinran quote, when I considered deeply the vow of the Buddha, which arose from 5 kalpas of profound thought, I realized that it was entirely for the sake of myself alone. but it's entirely for the sake of each of us alone. Don't think of it as it's for everybody. I get a little bit. That's not the way to think of it. Think of it as it's just for you. Everything that's going on in the universe is carrying just for you. That's the way you need to think about it. That's the way Shinran's seeing that. And it's not intended to diminish the others. It's to recognize that we are supported and we are cared for. Often, we talk about Amida Buddha as the Oya-sama, which is dear parent, apparently. In Japanese, they have a little bit less, it's easier to say parents and you don't have to say mom and dad as much as you could say parents. So, Amida Buddha and which parent Amida Buddha is irrelevant to this conversation. It's just that parental energy, that caring, like somebody who's going to hold you, if you're at the zoo and tiger cage, they're going to put their arm around you, and you'll be okay. The universe has challenges, but there's some sense of this other power that's supportive, and caring, present.
Are there, or will there be any women in these types of places? I mean, it's patriarchal. It would seem, since what we've talked about today. Help me out here. Just
Well,
curious.
So, yeah, if you've ever been to China 600 years ago,
Exactly.
there were
Which is
images
not uncommon for the whole world.
at different times, in different places, and different spaces. Tara, for instance, was an important Buddhist in Tibet, and she said, I'm not gonna wait till I'm reborn as a man to do all this stuff.
Okay.
She said that. Okay. Kuan Yin, the manifestation of the one who hears the cries of the world, is manifested as male and female, depends when. Whatever is appropriate, that's the way Kuan Yin is seen. Often in China, Kuan Yin is seen as female. But in India before, Kuan Yin was always male. And then in Japan, you see both.
Okay.
So we're not completely hung up on it, though it's true from all the cultures we've been talking about historically, that there weren't a lot of options. Now, in the life of Shinran, the first high priest of our lineage was his daughter, so that's interesting. And the next high priest of our lineage is going to be Otani Sensei's daughter, which is interesting. But in between time, there were no women in that particular position.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody, everybody in our lineage always, like temples often, almost always, have a man and a woman running them. And they may both be ordained, or maybe the man is ordained, but the woman is just as important, and they're referred to as the temple mother and the temple father. So it's a little more holistic understanding than some lineages do. So, right. How does having Shinjin affect us? You can see with new eyes. Once you start to trust the universe around you, you see with new eyes. So that's wisdom. If we think about our spiritual life as an important matter, maybe it's the most important matter, because if your next birth is going to be up to the winds of randomness, that's not a really good plan. If we can have some effect and pursue, recognize that spiritual energy is real and pursue a path, even if it's not quite the right path, at least we're trying. That's what virya is, energy, diligence. And it sounds like a big deal, but like something as simple as coming to the temple when there's a service at the temple every couple of weeks is quite challenging. Most of us have other things going on in our life, and showing up a lot of times in a row is hard, but it's worth it. And that's with Shinjin, then that becomes easy. Giving, dana, when you feel supported, it's easier to help and share. Patience is important. And over time, we recognize that all the teachers before us had long and complicated lives, so maybe expecting everything makes sense right now is a little unrealistic. So we can be patient with ourselves. We can be patient with the other people. Our life presents us with teachers, but Sila, translated as morality, once we see the interrelation of everything, then it's a lot easier to make skillful choices to not harm other beings. If we don't see that what we're doing is harmful to others, then it's almost impossible to stop doing it. Or so that has to do with self-reflection as well. But sila, morality, that would be self-reflection too. And dhyana, which is mindfulness, the most important mindfulness is mindfulness of the Buddha, Nembutsu, to be aware of the Buddha energy that's present around us. That's important. But even just being mindful when you open an orange, that the technology of the orange is wonderful and fantastic and practically miraculous. If you look around, see the space around our little planet, it is not very hospitable. And yet, here, a thing called a tree makes this thing called the orange, and when I peel it open, it has very wonderful, delicious fruit and juice in it. Well, that's just amazing. You can do that mindfulness practice regularly, or when you can, or when it comes to your mind. And it's really good to do because it's not just the orange. Every interaction we have with other beings, all this is wonderful and amazing in that way. But it's opening to curiosity. But mindfulness doesn't evaluate, it's not calculative, it just sees. Okay, those are the benefits of Shinjin. Shinjin is not belief in something blindly, but it is the combined awareness of the reality of my existence and the reality of Buddha's vow. The reality of Buddha's compassion in the universe. In that, we need to awaken to other powers. So, next one on our list, taking the time, we're probably doing fine, is Monpo. We talked a little bit about deep hearing. So, deep hearing of the light is a puzzling phrase. We can hear the call of the Nembutsu. So, we have this thing in Shin Buddhism where saying Namo Nembutsu is not a practice. A lot of parts of Buddhism, people say, well, what is your daily practice? It's hard to say, well, I don't do anything. It's the goodness of the universe flowing through me that does stuff, so I don't have a practice. I just sit here and it happens. Now, objectively, with cameras, I'm chanting the sutra, I'm saying the Nembutsu, I'm caring for the altar, I'm doing this stuff that happens every day that is what most people would call practice. But specifically the Nembutsu, we kind of feel as though when I'm chanting, it's the chant chanting me, not the other way around. That the sound, I mean, you can feel it. If a bunch of people chant together, at some point you kind of forget where your voice is in all the mix. It's the mixture of all the voices that you're experiencing. And it's not, certainly that whole mixture is not coming from you. And even your part is a strange thing to say. It's not separate, like the water in Lake Tahoe, the portion cups of water in the Lake Tahoe. It's just the water of Lake Tahoe. You don't say, well, that's that cup's water, this is this cup's water swirling around the Lake Tahoe. There's no way to do that. So hearing all the Nembutsu, the urge to say the Nembutsu or to feel that idea energetically. Now, deep hearing could be something we would do when we walk down a wooded lane and marvel at things without the calculation and stuff, sort of like the mindfulness practice I was talking about a moment ago. But it also has to do with marveling at how we have our imperfections, and yet the universe is caring for me all the time anyway, or maybe because I have these imperfections, the universe is caring for me. Sometimes I will have a flash of feeling tremendous gratitude for being offered the opportunity, I don't know how to say this, my ordination and being a priest at the temple. It just feels like a wonderful thing. Sometimes people say, well, you live in a whole big mansion. Well, it's not my mansion, it's just Buddha's house. I'm sweeping the floors and stuff here. Keeping it going, keeping the energy vibrant. Yes, that is a contribution. Anyway, I marvel at that gift that I received that people don't think deserved at all. As a matter of fact, I think it's the other way around. The universe finds the people who really need meditation that I will actually be able to understand that. That's above my pay grade, as some people say. Trust in the dynamic unfolding of life comes from observing life around you. That would keep me. Jinin, naturalness. This is a wonderful concept. So, remember that other quote from Shin Buddhism talks about I'm always calculating. And to be without that, without doubt, and without calculation, that's true and trusting. So, naturalness is the state of being without calculation. And Jinen actually means spontaneously in and of itself. So things just occurring out of themselves without intention or calculation, basically.
Could it have happened any other way?
Right. Well, that's interesting. When we ascribe our volition to the happening of everything, then we're not. It's not naturalist. But if you start thinking about it, the inscrutable unfolding of everything, it just occurs. I feel this way greatly about the pandemic and pandemic response. That if you look at all the different ways countries made up policies to do something about the pandemic, it turns out they all have exactly the same curves, except the countries that are lying about it. Exactly the same curves and spikes and blooms and disblooms and whatever, winters. Turns out this virus winters in the summer pretty much. And then it blooms in the winter. That's interesting. But it does that everywhere the same, whether it's the Swedes who didn't lock everything up or the English who did lock everything up. And they're pretty close together and pretty much genetically the same people, so you can't find any medical reason they're different. They just kind of, even in the States, some states did this, some states did that, but if you put the curves next to each other, they pretty much do exactly the same thing. Because that's the way that this particular organism unfolds in our population. And you can pretend we're fighting it, and the politicians, I fought it. Oh, wow. Okay. You're taking credit for the universe unfolding. It just unfolds. And you know, they make up stories. And when, so it was Omicron, right? It could have guessed beforehand that it was going to go a sharp curve up like this, and then it declines like that, right? And that's what happened. So when it's declining like this, a whole bunch of politicians waving their hands saying, see, we conquered it. Wait a second. It just unfolded the way it unfolded. Now, also, our responses are part of that natural occurring because we're just organisms like the virus. Viruses barely organs. They have organs that has structure. And they're not even alive without being in us. Like it doesn't reproduce without us. So it's much more a part of us really than in, thinking that it's an evil monster. It's us. It's just a part of us. It's like a finger. It's weird, but it's sort of true if you think about it. Anyway, so things unfold the way they unfold. Being able to live in naturalness is significant. So you can just be at peace with everything around you in a way that's very different from constantly calculating, is this good for me or bad for me? What should I do? If I want to do this, then I'll do that. Or if some student says that the universe is wise and compassionate, then you think, well, really? What about this thing? Oh, I had a flat tire. Okay, well, that's doubt. So doubt and calculation are kind of the opposites of true and trusting. But to live in naturalness is a wonderful and interesting thing, and we do experience it ourselves. We see other people who are more living in naturalness, and it's quite wonderful. We call it the influencing, sincere people, sincerity person. But the last thing I want to say about naturalness is in Shinnan's big book that he wrote for Shincho, that the Shoshinri is the middle part that really goes into this verse. He talks about naturalness, and at the end of the part about naturalness he says, but you can't think about it very much. Because if you think about naturalness, it becomes totally unnatural. So it has to, and it's painful to say this, but it has to kind of just happen to you. You have to be open to the spontaneity of it. It literally, spontaneous in and of itself is one of the translations of the word jinin. So I think sort of, sometimes the most wonderful kind of conversations I strangely enough, it seems like the Buddha energy in the universe actually is reaching out to the people we would call bad more than the people we would call good. Because the people we would call good don't really need it that much. But there's a whole bunch of calculative languages overlaid over that. So I will take Shinran's advice and not talk about naturalists anymore. So the home on the primal vow, I think we've talked about this some. So it's, one way of saying it is the universe is friendly. The Buddha's vow 12 kalpas ago was to manifest a Buddha field, a Buddhic Kshetra, energy field, or a Buddha world. It's hard to tell what they mean by field. Where sentient beings who just harmonize with Namo Butsu, with the name, can be reborn and understand the Dharma easily, without difficulty. 12 kalpas ago, the vow was made, and then 5 kalpas later, the Buddha succeeded in generating this Buddha field. This triptych is Amida Buddha in the Pure Land with Seishi and Kannon Bodhisattvas flanking, wisdom, compassion, Buddha Bodhisattvas flanking. It's really interesting for me because that was 5 kalpas after the vow, which, well, so it was 7 kalpas ago. Amida Buddha is already a Buddha, so in some weird way, it's like it's already an accomplished fact. Even though I'm not experiencing enlightenment yet, Amida Buddha made the vow in a weird way. He said, I won't become a Buddha unless sentient beings in the 10 directions, if they say my name even 10 times, which means a small number, can be reborn in his Sukhavati.
Those 10 directions, what does that mean?
Right. So north, south, east, west is 4. Split those, you get 8, and then up and down. Why they don't split up and down, I'm not quite sure, but it's just, you can get to 32 or whatever. 64 pretty quick, but it was big enough for. Yeah, those are the 10 directions, and that's in a way kind of spatial, but I like the idea that in Buddhism we think three-dimensionally. It's good. It's a good hint. It seems kind of realistic, reasonable. We live in a three-dimensional world, so yeah. So that means everywhere. We would have been fine to say everywhere, but we always say the 10 directions. And then the vow is very specific about the 10 directions. The idea that that field has been manifested, so it is an accomplished fact. Amida Buddha, Dharmakara Bodhisattva made a vow to generate this Buddha field. The Buddha field doesn't happen until Amida Buddha is a Buddha, so that enlightenment is a big deal. And since that has already occurred, this field has been established, that's wonderful. But in the vow it says, unless sentient beings in the 10 directions who say my name just 10 times can be reborn there. So that kind of means that we already have absolute potentiality to be reborn there. It's sort of done. It's kind of easy at this point. The hard part is the doubt and the calculation to take that step. There's a line in the Mahayana where he says, let's see if I can remember it. So many times Messiahs have pointed to the door, but no one had the guts to leave the temple. Weird thing for a priest to say, please don't leave right away. But what it means in the context of the opera Tommy, what I think Pete meant when he wrote it, was that when teachers can teach us how simple it is to release ourselves from the prisons or whatever holds us back, or the institutions, maybe the temple, whatever, the institution. If somebody says, well, all you got to do is just go through that door. Most people won't. It's scary. You don't want to be by yourself or whatever the limitations are. You don't have shinjin. That's what it takes. When he says the guts to leave the temple, he means shinjin, a true and trusting heart. Then you can leave. It's okay. It's operated. It's not a temple. I hate to have people leave all of a sudden. But anyway, people come and go. It's just a matter of other power. Nothing to do with me. The friendliness of the universe and then Butsu, I think, you know, when I say the name Butsu, I mean Namu Butsu, which is also referred to as the name. It's not really the Buddha's name. It refers to Namu, means I take refuge. Namu Amida Butsu actually means I take refuge in the Buddha. Namu can mean thou, so sometimes people translate it as I bow to the Buddha. But it's a little bit of a literal translation, it's not very effective, meaningful. Interesting, some people translate it as the bowing Buddha. They don't say I bow to the Buddha, they say the Buddha's bowing to you. That's a non-standard translation of Namo Amida Butsu. It's an interesting idea. The priest who does that's in France, I think. So it's English, you know, it's in France. So maybe not the highest authority, but it's an interesting way of looking at it. You put those words together, bow and the Buddha. Okay, those were the important concepts and words I wanted to talk about. The way these mind map things I draw work, there's always something else we can get to, but sometimes people ask where did all these things come from. The Meditation Sutra, or the Sutra on contemplating Amida Buddha, is where a lot of this comes from. And it's a fun sutra. We're reading it in our book group. We're kind of halfway through, so it's about a queen who's imprisoned, and the Buddha lives nearby, and she kind of asks if the Buddha can come help her, and she's in prison, and the Buddha says, you know, 10,000 miles that way, I mean, the Buddha is teaching Dharma right now. So, you know, if you can connect to that, that's important. We're reading the sutra very carefully, and it actually says she asks the Buddha to teach her about that, which is kind of interesting, because how'd she know about it before the Buddha taught her about it? You know, maybe he mentioned it to her before or something like that. They were friends, and he was friends with the king and queen of Magadha, little city-state in northern India at the time. But he teaches her, and I think the motif, the idea that she's in prison, and she's not asking, how do I get out of here, but how do I go onward from this? We're all imprisoned, and so seeing these ideas, seeing the wise and working the wise and compassionate universe around us, is a kind of release from that prison. The prison of selfishness is the obvious thing in Buddhism we would call a prison. It limits us, and it limits our vision, it limits our ability to see and connect with all the universe around us. I think probably some people who are considered psychic are probably less encumbered by that and can feel those pathways. We are all interconnected, and yet we feel separate, and that's the problem. So in this meditation sutra, he teaches her, there's a list, and I think it says 10, and then it says 12, but he actually teaches her 15 different meditations, which is sort of funny, that she can do in her prison cell, and they're kind of gradual, more and more difficult process of visualization. So that's one of the three important sutras of Pure Buddhism. The largest sutra on Amida Buddha tells about the idea of the vow and the whole process of Amida Buddha becoming a Buddha. The Meditation Sutra talks about the Nibbutsu and how we can connect to Amida Buddha's Pure Land, and then a smaller sutra on the Pure Land describes what the Pure Land looks like, which is fairly confusing. It's talking about jewel trees and sapphire ponds, and it's an important sutra, but it's the meaning is veiled beneath this kind of flowery language that is not really the way I talk all the time. So Meditation Sutra is my favorite of the three. Just talk about the larger sutra and the smaller sutra. Okay, so see what it looks like? Very sparkly. This is actually the altar area is a representation of what the Pure Land. See the sapphire pond, and then the rubies are the ground next to. It's actually some stuff I got online. It's broken up pieces of glass, the blue said, wondering if we have too much gold on our altar. You know, we have like the fake gold leaf wallpaper. Fake gold leaf wallpaper, fake gold leaf. In Japan, that would be real gold leaf on the walls, and sometimes bigger walls. But it's not intended as an expression of pride of the temple. It's an attempt at creating a representation of the pyramid. That's the reason for it. So, give them a break. It's not what you think. They're just trying to show how wonderful, you know, gold has a sense of purity around it because it doesn't adulterate, it doesn't rust, and that sort of thing.
It was their way to show it back then.
Right.
That's what they,
Right.
that's what they used.
Nowadays we use computer graphics.
Exactly.
We try to make things, you know, amazing things with computer graphics, but it's just the people using what they had to express these ideas of purity or value. That's why all the ground is all jewels, everything's jewels, the trees. That when the wind blows through the trees, it teaches the Dharma. Wonderful description. The reason we know about all this is, again, back to Shakyamuni Buddha, 2,600 years ago. In those sutras, in those opportunities to teach, he taught us this. That's why we know. And we feel as though that is valid because Buddhists can see into this matrix of beingness in a way we can't. Because they're not limited by the I mean myself bubble that we close ourselves off in. That's why that people are particularly wise. Their teaching is important and valid. Okay. Any questions on those word concept things we were just talking about? Okay, I agree. We could probably find an easier way to get to this list. We read part one of the last time, let's just say. Part two is in the class plan. So if you could read that, at this point we kind of need to finish the book because we only have one more class. For some strange reason, my class plan says class 1, class 2, class 4. Don't know why that is, but it should say 3. Next time, we'll talk about Shin Buddhist living. So, how do we do that? So, these are the ideas, this is where Shin Buddhism came from. How do we implement that in life every day? We use the Eightfold Path as the framework for that. And then we'll also talk about Shimon's life. Will not be here, however, so we're going to start reading. Because I didn't turn the mic on after the break. Sorry. Oh man. Can we do that over again? Okay. Well, thank you. And enjoy the reading. We'll see you next time. I guess I could go back and overdub it. But it'd be hard to know what I said. Shoot. It seemed like such an easy way to make a recording. Just turn on the recording. But at the break, I turned it off because it was weird. You're welcome. Well, I guess I'll turn it off now.